I knew the second I saw the riding mower tracks cutting through my back trail that somebody from that neighborhood had finally crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Then I saw the pile: branches, wet grass clippings, busted drywall, old mulch bags, even somebody's rotten patio furniture stacked right up against my fence like my land was some kind of public landfill. And the thing that really got me wasn't even the trash. It was how comfortable they looked doing it on the security footage, laughing while they dumped it over the fence like they'd done it 100 times before. I live just outside a development called Blackwood Heights, one of those upscale gated communities that popped up about 10 years ago after developers started buying farmland outside town and turning it into luxury country living. Big stone entrances, fake waterfalls, matching mailboxes, HOA newsletters that read like threats. You know the type. Meanwhile, my place had been there long before any of them showed up. My grandfather bought the land back in the 70s when nobody wanted to live this far outside the city. 10 wooded acres, a small cabin-style house, trails winding down toward the creek, enough quiet that at night all you hear are frogs and wind moving through pine trees. That quiet mattered to me more than people probably realized. After my divorce, I stopped wanting crowds, stopped wanting noise. I spent years working commercial construction in Nashville, always around yelling, engines, concrete dust, deadlines. By the time I hit my 40s, all I wanted was coffee on my porch and enough space nobody could tell me how tall my grass should be. The people in Blackwood Heights did not understand that mindset. To them, land existed to impress other people. Every lawn looked like a golf course. Every driveway had some oversized SUV that had never seen dirt in its life. Half the folks there treated landscaping like a competitive sport. You'd see grown adults standing around on Saturdays drinking wine and judging hydrangeas like they were Olympic judges. At first, we mostly ignored each other. Every now and then I'd catch somebody slowing down near my property line, staring at my old barn or the trails cutting through the woods like they couldn't understand why someone wouldn't develop it. One guy actually offered to buy 3 acres from me so the HOA could expand the recreation space. I told him the woods already had recreation. It was called trees. He didn't laugh. Still, things stayed civil until spring cleanup season rolled around. That morning I'd gone down toward the creek to check trail cameras because something had been getting into my chicken feed. I figured raccoons. Instead, I found that mountain of garbage leaning against the fence line. Fresh tire tracks. Broken branches snapped underfoot. The smell of wet grass and construction adhesive baking in the sun. I just stood there for a second staring at it. You ever get so mad you go completely calm? That was me. I walked back to the house, pulled up the security footage from the pole cam I had mounted near the South Trail, and there they were. 3 landscaping trucks from the same company rolling behind the subdivision over 2 different afternoons. One of the crews even pointed at my no trespassing sign before backing up and dumping anyway. That part stayed with me, because now it wasn't ignorance anymore. It was permission. Somewhere along the line, these people had decided land outside their gates didn't belong to a real person. So I drove straight to the HOA office. Now, the president of Blackwood Heights was a woman named Cynthia Draper. Early 50s, always dressed like she was about to walk into a country club brunch. Blonde hair locked into place by what had to be industrial-grade hairspray. She had this way of smiling while talking down to you that made every conversation feel like customer service at a funeral. I walked in carrying printed screenshots from the footage and set them on her desk. She barely glanced at them. "Well," she said, leaning back slowly, "that area behind the subdivision has always been a little unclear property-wise." I actually laughed when she said it because I thought she was joking. "Unclear," I said. "Cynthia, those fence posts are older than your neighborhood." She folded her hands together like a politician preparing for a press conference. Our landscaping contractors were probably under the impression that it was in used land. Unused. I remember staring at her after she said that word. Unused. Like because I wasn't building condos on it. Because I liked trees more than tennis courts, Suddenly my property didn't count. I told her she had 7 days to remove every bit of that garbage or I'd deal with it myself. And the worst part? She smiled. Not nervous. Not apologetic. Amused. Like she thought I was some bitter hillbilly throwing a tantrum because rich people inconvenienced him. What Cynthia didn't understand was, I'd spent most of my life around construction crews, contractors, developers, inspectors, and one thing I learned real young is this. People get real arrogant when they think there won't be consequences. And by day 8, I was done being polite. By the 8th day, that pile was still sitting there baking in the Tennessee heat, like some kind of monument to entitlement. If anything, it had gotten bigger. Somebody had added fresh hedge trimmings and what looked like leftover tile from a bathroom remodel. That's when I realized this wasn't just laziness anymore. Once people think they can get away with something, they start testing how far they can push it. And honestly, part of me almost let it go. That's the truth nobody talks about in stories like this. Most regular people avoid conflict because conflict is exhausting. I'd spent years building a quiet life after my marriage fell apart. The last thing I wanted was some neighborhood war with people who had too much money and too much free time. But then something happened that changed the whole thing for me. A few days after my meeting with Cynthia, I was repairing a section of fence near the back trail when my neighbor Walt pulled up on his ATV. Walt owned the property on the other side of mine, retired electrician, Vietnam vet, one of those old school guys who says maybe 20 words an hour unless he really likes you. He looked over at the debris pile and just shook his head. You gonna let them do that to you? Simple question. But it hit harder than he probably meant it to. Because the answer was no. Not really. See, it wasn't about the trash anymore. It was about what came with it. The assumption that because I lived quieter, because my place wasn't wrapped in stone entrances and HOA bylaws, somehow I mattered less. That night I sat on my porch with a beer listening to tree frogs and thinking about Cynthia's face when she said the word and used. And somewhere around midnight, staring out at those woods my grandfather left me, I stopped feeling angry and started getting creative. Now before anybody in the comments loses their mind, let me say this clearly. I never damaged their property directly, never crossed onto their lawns, never vandalized anything. Everything that happened after that came from nature doing what nature does best. I rented an industrial wood chipper and compost shredder from a place about 30 minutes outside town. The guy at the rental counter asked what project I was working on and I told him, neighborhood improvement. He laughed harder than he should have. Over the next 2 days, I processed every ounce of debris they dumped on my land. Grass clippings, mulch, branches, leaves, all shredded down into rich compost. Then I started adding to it. Wild crabgrass seed, dandelions, creeping vine mix, and the crown jewel, kudzu. Now if you didn't grow up in the South, you may not understand how terrifying kudzu actually is. That stuff doesn't grow like a normal plant. It advances. It swallows things. Old barns, telephone poles, abandoned cars. Kudzu covers everything until it looks like nature itself is trying to erase civilization. And technically, it wasn't illegal on my property. Questionable? Maybe. Petty? Absolutely. Illegal? No. I spent an entire Saturday running my tractor along the fence line spreading that compost mixture thick right near the edge of Blackwood Heights. Didn't cross the property line once. I even checked the survey markers twice. And while I worked, I could feel eyes on me. A couple homeowners stood out on their elevated decks pretending not to stare. One woman in a visor actually took pictures of me with her phone. Around sunset, a guy I'd seen jogging through the subdivision walked down near the fence and yelled, "What ya planting over there?" I looked right at him and said, "Privacy." He didn't know what I meant yet. But he would. The first week, nothing happened. Then came the rain. Warm spring rain followed by humid 80-degree weather, basically steroids for invasive plants. Within days, little green shoots started appearing all along the fence line. By the second week, vines were climbing through the decorative iron fencing behind several homes. And that's when the panic started. One morning I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. Unknown numbers. Voicemails. One woman sounded genuinely emotional. "There are weeds coming through our retaining wall." Another guy was furious. "Whatever you planted is spreading onto private property." I almost called him back just to ask if he understood the irony. Then Cynthia called. I'll give her credit. She skipped the fake politeness this time. "What exactly did you do?" she snapped the second I answered. I leaned back in my porch chair and watched two deer move through the tree line while she talked. "Well," I said calmly, "I recycled the material your residents illegally dumped on my property. You planted invasive species next to our homes." "No," I said. "I improved my soil quality on my land." Remember? The gray area. Silence. You could actually hear her trying not to explode. By the third week, Blackwood Heights looked like it was losing a fight against the jungle. Thick vines crawled under fences. Dandelions exploded across pristine lawns like yellow fireworks. Crabgrass spread through sprinkler systems and flower beds. One house near the southern edge got hit the worst. The vines wrapped around decorative shrubs and climbed halfway up a pergola before landscapers hacked them down. And those landscapers? Same company. I recognized the trucks immediately. One afternoon, I watched them from my trail cam footage spraying chemicals near the property line while homeowners stood nearby arguing. At one point, Cynthia herself showed up wearing sunglasses and white tennis clothes like she was arriving at a hostage negotiation. That should have been enough. Honestly, if they'd just admitted they screwed up, I probably would have let the whole thing end there. But rich people with too much pride almost never stop digging once they start losing. A week later, I opened my mailbox and found a certified letter from an attorney representing the Blackwood Heights HOA. 12 pages long, threatening legal action over intentional ecological damage and vegetation encroachment affecting property value. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading that thing twice because I couldn't believe the audacity. These people dumped construction waste on my land, then threatened to sue me because plants grew near their fence. That was the moment the whole situation changed from neighborhood drama into something bigger. Because unlike Cynthia and her little HOA board, I actually knew how county enforcement worked. Years in construction taught me something important. Local inspectors love paperwork when it's handed to them clean and easy. So instead of calling a lawyer, I called the county environmental office. And once the inspector saw the footage of those landscaping trucks dumping debris over my fence, the expression on his face changed immediately. That man actually paused the video, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Well, these folks are about to have a very expensive month." The county inspector showed up 3 days later in an unmarked pickup wearing jeans, work boots, and the kind of expression that told me he was already tired of everybody involved before the conversation even started. His name was Russell, older guy, probably late 60s, former contractor himself from the sound of it. He walked the fence line slowly while I explained everything, stopping every few feet to take photos of the debris pile, the tire tracks, the remnants of construction materials still mixed into the compost. Then I showed him the security footage. Not edited, not dramatic, just clean timestamps of landscaping trucks backing up to my property and dumping load after load over the fence while workers joked around smoking cigarettes. Russell watched the whole thing without speaking. When the third truck appeared on screen, he muttered, "Jesus Christ, they didn't even try to hide it." That's when I knew Blackwood Heights was in trouble. See, what most people don't understand is counties take illegal dumping seriously for one reason above all else: liability. Once construction debris enters private land, especially near water runoff areas, it becomes an environmental issue. Paint residue, treated wood, adhesives, chemicals, suddenly it's not yard waste anymore. And my creek ran less than 200 yards downhill. Russell asked me one question before leaving. "You want this handled informally or officially?" I thought about it for maybe 2 seconds. "Officially." He nodded once like he expected that answer all along. About 10 days later, the storm hit. The landscaping company got fined first. Then each homeowner involved got separate citations. The HOA itself got dragged into the investigation because emails surfaced showing multiple complaints from residents about landscapers dumping behind the subdivision months before my footage was ever recorded. Meaning Cynthia knew. Or at the very least, she should have known. That's where things got ugly inside the neighborhood. Walt called me one evening laughing so hard, he could barely talk straight. "You need to drive by that entrance tomorrow," he said. And I did. Lord, it looked like a civil war. Residents standing outside arguing in clusters, landscaping crews tearing out dead sections of lawn, HOA board members getting cornered near the mailbox pavilion while people demanded answers. One guy in golf clothes was screaming loud enough I could hear him from the road. "I pay $900 a month in HOA fees, and my backyard looks like Jumanji." I'm not proud of this next part, but I laughed so hard I had to pull the truck over. The total fines ended up somewhere around 80 grand once cleanup costs got added. Apparently, the environmental office found enough treated lumber and construction adhesive in the pile to classify portions of it as unlawful disposal. And because the HOA had ignored previous complaints, the county came down harder than usual. That was the moment Blackwood Heights stopped acting superior around town. Funny how quickly arrogance disappears once invoices start arriving. But the part nobody saw coming was what happened to Cynthia. About a month after the citations went out, she showed up at my property alone. No sunglasses, no tennis outfit, no polished HOA smile. Just jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and a face that looked 10 years older than the last time I saw her. I was stacking firewood when her SUV pulled into the gravel drive. She stepped out slowly and looked around at the woods for a second before speaking. "I think we got off on the wrong foot." I actually laughed at that. "You dumped garbage on my land, Cynthia." She crossed her arms like she was cold, even though it was warm outside. "I didn't personally dump anything." "No," I said. "You just defended the people who did." That one landed. You could see it in her face. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Just wind moving through trees and the sound of my splitter ticking as it cooled off in the driveway. Then she surprised me. "I grew up poor," she said quietly. "You know that?" I didn't answer. My father worked maintenance for the county parks department. We lived in a trailer until I was 14. She looked back toward the subdivision entrance, barely visible through the trees. "When we moved into Blackwood Heights, I spent years trying to fit in there. Years. And suddenly everything about her made sense. The perfection, the control, the way she talked like she was always performing for invisible judges. People who spend too long desperate to belong will defend a broken system just to avoid being excluded from it. Doesn't excuse what she did, but I understood it better. She told me the HOA board was probably forcing her out at the next election. Said residents blamed her for escalating the situation instead of handling it quietly when I first complained. Then she looked at the tree line where the vines had grown thick along the back fence and asked, almost reluctantly, "So what happens now?" I looked out toward the woods myself. Truth was, my property had never looked better. The compost enriched the soil. Wildflowers started blooming near the fence line. Birds and deer moved back into areas that used to be thin and patchy. And the overgrowth created such a dense natural barrier, I couldn't even see most of Blackwood Heights anymore. Which honestly felt perfect. I think, I told her, everybody should probably stay on their own side of the fence. She nodded slowly. No comeback. No speech. Then she got back in her SUV and drove away. I haven't spoken to her since. Now every town has people who think I overreacted. Some say I should have just hired a lawyer immediately instead of turning the whole thing into a neighborhood nightmare. Others think Blackwood Heights got exactly what they deserved after treating somebody else's property like a dumping ground. And honestly, maybe both sides are right. But I'll tell you this. Nobody has thrown so much as a single leaf over my fence ever again. These days when I sit on my porch in the evening, all I see are trees, wildflowers, and that thick wall of green separating me from the subdivision behind it. Nature handled the privacy issue better than any fence ever could. And every once in a while, when the wind shifts just right, I can still hear lawn crews somewhere on the other side of those woods fighting a war against weeds they helped create.